Good morning and welcome to a very special edition of Can We Talk? I'm Theresa Skorseth and I have a guest here today that you're going to want to hear from. Jim Rothstein is a New York City detective. He's retired now, living in St. Martin where he's actually the mayor. Let's establish a little background for our audience. Jim, how long have you been pursuing justice, and especially in the name of human trafficking, which is what we're doing today?
Well, thank you for having me on. Actually, this July is 50 years. It was 50 years ago that I saw the first girl being prostituted in Times Square from the Stearns County, Morrison, the central Minnesota area. So it was 50 years ago, and I've been working on it ever since.
Now that's what they used to call the Minnesota Mile?
No, it was the Minnesota Strip.
Minnesota Strip.
Yeah.
Tell us a little about that.
Well, the Minnesota Strip, because at that time, we had actually in the 60s already, at any given time, there were 400 girls from Minnesota being prostituted in New York. And naturally, everything gets a name, and it became known as the Minnesota Strip. And what really solidified that was in 1977, when we had the public hearings. The governor of the state of New York had assigned me to the New York State Select Committee on Crime to see the effects these crimes were having on society. So I had a partner by the name of Matty Rosenthal, and we worked very closely. We had finally found 2 officers in Minnesota that were willing to work with us. And with that, we brought, I think it was 11 or 13 young girls to New York to testify. And that's when the New York Strip got solidified.
Now this would be a very clear prime example of human trafficking. With many 400 girls from Minnesota didn't just spontaneously decide all on their own to go to New York and be prostitutes.
Well, no, that's not the way it works. You know, that's the politically correct, feel-good, do-good version of human trafficking. And you'll find that that is the popular thing now, and it has been for 50 years. Nobody wants to talk about the trafficking itself. They just want to talk again about the feel-good, do-good, what's politically correct, and that's the only thing you get to hear. That's the only laws they're passing too. They are not addressing human trafficking.
Can you give us a quick definition of human trafficking for those who are not familiar with the term?
Well, human trafficking has a number of aspects, but the most important thing is that these people, these kids, are picked up, forced into prostitution or the different versions of it. That includes both males and females. And then they're forced to perform their acts to make money for a pimp, which is the street language. I like how they address it differently now, but let's get down to the facts of life. They're being pimped. Mm-hmm. And nobody wants to talk about pimps.
Right. How did you get started in the human trafficking?
Well, it started off, what happened was I had done the captain a favor at Christmas time with a problem they had in the precinct. I was a young rookie cop. Mm-hmm. And we were having a tremendous amount of girls working, and he knew they were from Minnesota. And because I was from Minnesota, he figured I should take care of my own problems. So then it was about right after Christmas, sometime in February, March, that I was assigned, I can't use the word that they called it, but it was a posse, and it rhymes with posse, so you can figure out what the name of it was. Again, we were not politically correct because the business we were in was not, and I didn't want it. But then I was told if I didn't take it, I'd never get another assignment, and I'm bound to beat the rest of my life. So I got involved in it, and it took us, I got to pick 5 partners, and what we basically did was round up hookers that were loitering for the purpose of prostitution. Well, you put a bunch of cops at that time, I wasn't a detective yet, and hookers together, and they'll find a way to make things work. Well, we did, and it took us it took about 45 days to find out that prostitution, as it was known in the clinical verbiage, was not what the real story was. And so we started working on it, and there was a young girl, her name was Peggy, and the pimps decided to kill her when she didn't want to work for them anymore. So when the pimps showed up, I was there with my partners and we arrested the pimps. So after that, she was an informant of mine, and she became one of the top call girls in the United States. That goes to the level that you will never see investigated. So once I had that established that I could be trusted, things changed. And then what happened was that I started noticing that the pimps were supervising the girls on the street, and I realized our undercover men were in danger, because how would they know if it was a cop or a customer? And sure, lo and behold, they killed one of our undercover men. And then everything broke loose.
Yeah.
Then I was, as they called, cut loose, and we formed a pimp squad. And by that time, we had already known how this was operating. And then we got into it in about 1971-72. Was the only joint investigation ever done in this country, where we went after 11 of the top 12 pimps in the United States. It was the FBI, Customs, IRS, New York City Police Department, Lieutenant Gary McGaughy and his partner from Minneapolis Police Department. There were 2 cops from Columbus, Ohio, 1 guy from Chicago. And we had finally formed, I was sent out, I was cut loose, which meant I traveled and organized all this. And we ended up convicting 11 of the top 12 pimps. But what was the most amazing thing, as soon as we were done, anybody in the federal government who had worked with us was transferred out. So that's how we first went after, and to this day it remains the only investigation where they went after the big boys.
Wow, that hardly ever happens.
No, you'll hear about these arrests nowadays where they locked up 90 pimps and all that. Well, that's easy, because they're what we call the popcorn pimps. They have one girl and are working the truck stops and stuff like that. Yes, it's easy to go after, it's easy to get them, and it don't cause any problems, because one of the big byproducts of human trafficking is what they call human compromise.
Now, I've heard that term from you before. Could you give us a little background on that idea?
Yes, human compromise is when you take the weakness or the vulnerability of somebody in power, may it be male, female, or whatever, and you set them up with a kid or a prostitute, male or female, and you make a record of it, and then you have control of them.
Because you can always expose them. It's a kind of...
Yes, and it's a facet of human trafficking that you will never hear addressed. Although lately, if you've been following what's breaking in England for the last 2 years, you'll see the whole upper echelon in the government has basically been brought down for using kids. And when I was first involved in this, many of you remember the Profumo scandal with Mandy Rice Davies and all that. Well, it was about very early in my career when they came over to meet with me to find out if the Profumo scandal had actually leaked back to the United States. And I was able, with my informant, to determine that it was not directly involved, but that's what first got us into human compromise and stuff at the highest levels.
So human compromise and human trafficking can happen at a very local level or international.
Oh yes, it is. It's local and international. It's different facets of this. Like in St. Martin, we passed a resolution on human trafficking, and one of the things I address in that is human compromise. Because if you don't make that illegal, you got a problem. And number one, you got to protect these people. They're compromised, and that's why you can't get anything done.
Right.
I've had it from Robert Merritt, who was one of my top informants. I didn't really get to know him until 2 years ago. For 40 years, he gave me information, but when he thought he was dying of cancer, he called me to let me know who he was, and he wrote a book about Watergate. And in that book, he comes out how on the Watergate break-in and all that, which was human compromise too. So that's how we get into that.
So is this the latest move you've made in the human compromise or the human trafficking area? this resolution for the city of St.
Oh,
Martin?
no. The latest one was, in fact, just this morning when I got a call from one of my people in St. Cloud. But on Tuesday, as a result of a phone call I got from Bemidji on Monday, telling me about how the young Native American girls are being trafficked up there as of Monday yet.
Oh my God.
And what's so interesting is that 50 years ago, we already had that, because one of the victims that came to testify was a young Native American girl who had been a thalidomide baby. And she had a flipper for her left arm, and when she testified, it was public testimony, and she wouldn't testify unless I sat next to her. And she was a beautiful girl, soft-spoken, and she told us how she was trafficked from the Native American country up by Bemidji, Black Duck area, down through Duluth to Minneapolis to New York. And this lady the other day that called me gave me first-hand information on how that's still going on today. So yes, this information is kept up, it's current. A couple years ago, I went to a conference in St. Cloud where they were going to talk about human trafficking, and they made their presentation, and I sat there, nobody knew who I was. And finally, when they were over, anybody have a comment? So I got up and I says, well, I want to thank you folks that after 47 years, somebody is finally doing something. And they looked at me, and then I told them who I was. And I said, by the way, I said, there's still a young girl from Rockville, Minnesota that died. She was killed by her pimp, Red Dog. And I says, to this day, nobody has ever admitted who the parents are of that girl from Rockville, Minnesota. So that got me started on that, and eventually we formed a task force. And that, as you know, I told you I ended up being asked to leave the task force because I didn't fit the Minnesota model.
I find that so intriguing. I mean, you are a native of Minnesota. That's
Oh, yes.
something you haven't mentioned, which is how you got involved with the Minnesota Strip and the ladies who have been trafficked there. And now you're the mayor of St. Martin, and he's not a model, a Minnesota model for starting a human trafficking organization, or an anti-human trafficking organization, you could say. Tell us about this Minnesota Department of Health resolution.
Well, what it did, St. Martin in 2014 passed resolution number 2014-08, which was in response. I observed two young kids in town that were going to be grabbed by some pimps who had moved into town. I recognized what was going on, and then I had an informant in the operation, and he told me, you better watch it, they're ready to take the girls. So I stepped in and stopped it, and both girls have ended up very well. But as a result of that, the city council in St. Martin and myself, we came up with a resolution which I'm willing to discuss. And what's funny is we passed the resolution and sent it to the governor of the state of Minnesota. The governor of the state of Minnesota found it in his best interest to send it to the Minnesota Department of Health. I gave you a copy of that request. And I find it interesting that this is a health issue. It is. When you're politically correct, feel good, do good, you'll overuse that because it's so true. They're treating this as a medical condition. And everything I give, I have cases, investigations, tombstones, or something to back it up with. And that's not the way it works. You know, you've got to work on this as law enforcement. And going back on that, there's a lot of things I cite here in Minnesota because a lot of people don't know the New York City Police Department don't just work in New York. And when I was cut loose, I was given an unlimited expense account, which is probably more than some of the budgets the police departments have. And that's how I got to go around the country and work on this. But as a result, the Minnesota Department of Health, I called them Tuesday after a lady from Duluth, from Bemidji called me, and I says, well, it's been a year now, and I haven't gotten a call. Well, you know, we're working on it. I says, but it's not going after the pimps. Well, we have other issues, and that's the public safety group, and them. I says, yeah. I says, I talked to them and they're not doing anything. And I says, that goes back a lot of years that I can go into that. And the lady, really, I felt sorry for her. Because I don't know of how many doctors in the Board of Health or Department of Health have arrest powers. When you only address some of the issues and you don't go after the traffickers. And I cited her a case where a 15-year-old girl in St. Cloud that I had gotten when I was on the task force, when I was still considered part of the Minnesota model, you know, we found that she had been grabbed, and she was up here in a safe house, up here in Brainerd. And at 2:30 in the morning, she disappeared, and I told this lady, it says, by 6 o'clock she was turning tricks in Minneapolis. It says, she must be the fastest girl in the world to be able to run from Brainerd to Minneapolis and then start working. I says, we know the pimp took her. And this same girl we took in front of the mayor of St. Cloud, Dave Kleiss, and we sat her down and she started telling her story. And the mayor says, oh, you're a runaway. And this girl goes, wait a second. She says, I'm a runaway. She says, that man told me if I didn't go out and turn tricks and make money, he was going to hurt my mother and my brother. And I'm a runaway? Well, this is what you do, because as long as they're runaways and homeless, it's not a crime statistic. So, you know, you're covered with that. But here's this young lady, and telling him flat to his face, and I offered to even tell him what it was, and I've never heard from him to this day. So you can see it's not just the Board of Health or Department of Health or even the governor. But like again, when you want to, we should go into this resolution so that people understand. And the biggest thing that we addressed in that resolution was you have to protect the cops. First of all, they don't have the money to do this right. This is expensive to investigate this. These pimps are fluid. They are constantly moving their girls around, which makes sense. You know, wherever the money is, you go. And then the thing is, every law enforcement agent, and I have the names, that has ever worked this stuff about the, like I say, the lot lizards, his career is over. I don't care what level of law enforcement touches this. That's why it's hard to find an honest cop that is willing to take this on. And I'm sure there's people in the audience that are going to say, well, I says, if they want, they can call you and you can put them in touch with me. And I will give them the names and the cases. Like I said, everything I have has names and cases tied to it.
Okay.
And that is as of within the last 5 years, I was still told that you know we can't investigate this. And it's true. I mean, who do you expect to throw themselves on the
sword?
Yeah. So that's how we got this year into the Board of Health thing. And that's why it's so important for our city councils to pass this resolution.
Give us some of the highlights of that resolution.
Well, the first one, it goes into all the descriptions, but the number one is any person or entity who uses human trafficking, children, child porn, pedophilia to compromise, extort, or cause another person to do an unwilling act shall be guilty of a felony with a mandatory 25-year to life prison term, no parole, prison sentence. Now, originally I had that as the death penalty, but a number of our Mothers Against Trafficking were nuns from St. Francis here and St. Benedict said they didn't really agree with the death penalty, so I made it 25 to life. But you know, you got to cut something that's compromised. Now, this is the one that you have to worry about the most, is the human compromise. The victims of that very seldom ever live. The others you always have hope of recovering, but this here one very seldom. Any person or entity that buys, sells, trades, or in any way promotes, enables, or profits from human trafficking, pedophilia, human compromise, extortion, or uses children in a criminal manner shall be guilty of a felony with a 25 to life prison, no parole. This is self-explanatory. This covers everything, you know. The third one, the use of electronics. Now you'll notice in modern day, all these things, they have all these different websites and different ways of communicating, Facebook, social media, or any other form of communications to facilitate, promote, or further human trafficking, child porn, pedophilia, human compromise, extortion, the use of children in a criminal matter shall be guilty of a felony with a mandatory fine of $1 million per incident and 10-year prison sentence for each party involved. Now, you start enforcing that, like you'll read in these cases, they're using Backpage and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
This would even mean if the pimp waves across the street, that's a form of communication.
Okay.
That's what he gets. Now, number 4, any person, agency, or other entity that interferes, threatens, harasses, impedes, or in any way compromises an investigator, investigation, prosecution, or witness in a human trafficking, child porn, pedophilia, or criminal use of children case shall be guilty of a felony and a mandatory 5-year prison sentence. That means if you're a cop doing your job and your boss comes to you and tells you quit it, or you get harassment from the outside, to get locked up. This is the thing that you've got to do to protect the cops. Now, here's the one that will turn them all off. Any enforcement agency, agent, prosecutor, elected government official, elected, or any other authority that fails to act with due haste on human trafficking, pedophilia, or the criminal use of children complaint, and then fails to do a complete investigation of the complaint should be guilty of a felony. Well, felons can't serve on public. But this is the one, when you get to elected government officials are responsible, that's when you'll see something get done.
Okay.
And now you'll see why they don't want to hear about my
Yeah.
resolution. And then, another big thing is that you have to have oversight on this. Because you can see how this can be abused. And there are many cases that I can cite where inexperienced people thinking they were doing the right thing went after innocent people and just destroyed whole families and communities. And this is why you need oversight to make sure. And I address all of that. And there's a whole history behind this here. It's like the Minnesota Department of Health said, well, Jim, you guys made that up. I says, yeah, but I says, there were some very good legal minds that helped me with that, people who I have worked with over the years on this. So if anybody wants, again, there's much more with this. It gives you the purpose and need. It also gives you the description of the different things like what is an unwilling act, extortion, profits, haste, and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So everything is covered in here. It also has a page that what constitutes human trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
And I think everybody should look at that. Take it to your city council. See what they do with it. It should be interesting.
We'll try to get this up on a blog too. We can put it on Robin's blog if you're cool with that, Robin. Remind me again, it's R.L. Hensel, blogspot.com.
My blog is robinhensel.blogspot.com.
robinhensel.blogspot.com. So if you want to see more of that document, want to see that document, look there for it.
And that's ROBIN
ROBIN
HENSEL
HENSEL
.blogspot.com.
blogspot.com. And Jim, this covers so many bases. It's clear that you've foreseen so many of the problems that might arise around trying to get this resolution effective on the street. So thank you so much. That's 50 years of experience, folks. 50 years.
Well,
of this business.
and there's one other thing that's with this too, is if you do this, you'll start seeing things happening. We're not addressing the pimps that are out there moving these girls. Or when you get to the next level, the people who supply kids to like for instance, Washington, D.C., and the higher echelon of the country. And we were right up to the highest levels of this. In fact, we even, when I arrested Frank Sturgis, one of the Watergate burglars, he verified the information on what the Watergate burglary was really all about. And what that was about was there was a pedophile ring operating out of there besides the prostitution ring. And they wanted the name, see, it's what we used to call the book, where they keep a record of who the customer is, what his fetish is, and what they're willing to pay. Well, if you got that, and both the Democrats and Republicans were using that. So certain individuals who I can't name right now, but are available, wanted that so they could compromise both the Democrats and Republicans. And like I said, this was further verified by the arresting officer, Carl Schaffler, who was my counterpart in Washington, D.C., who worked the same thing there. He knew about the Watergate burglary a month before it happened. And the other part of this is the burglar, Frank Sturgis, who I arrested and was able to debrief for hours before anybody knew we had it. So that gets into a whole other facet of this, but just to show you the levels of this.
Yeah, it goes from the most basic local levels to, well, as I said earlier, international, but certainly at the national level, there was a great deal going on. I am so impressed by how well you remember all of these things. My memory is famously bad. So whenever someone comes along and says, yes, it was July 3rd, 1973, I just think, wow, I couldn't have pinned it in the 70s myself, but that's me. So, yes, we have a question from the audience.
Jim, recently there was a sting of a prostitution ring, a bust up in the Brainerd area, and a prostitute by the name of Sonny, who I believe was probably a male, was listed in. I'd like if you could bring this local and talk about the former sheriffs here that you might have had contact with, any officers you might have had contact with, and if you think that the local stuff that's going on, the most recent stings, are connected in any way to trafficking, if you could talk about that as well.
Well, certainly, because like I said, I started on this in 1965. Once I got cut loose, I traveled all over the country looking to get this together. So naturally, Minnesota was my first stop because of all the Minnesota kids. And I traveled up and down the state looking for help and people, cops who would cooperate. Finally, we found two guys in Minneapolis, Lieutenant Gary McGahee and a cop by the name of Kenny Tidwell. And it was unbelievable what they had. And with that, I was out here many, many times over the years. And on one particular night, we got a call to come to this, at that time they were called go-go bars. And we got there, and the informant was there, and we were all in plain clothes, nobody knew who we were. And there was the sheriff of Stearns County, the sheriff of Morrison County, the sheriff of Crow Wing and Cass County. And they were putting $50 bills in the girls' G-strings.
Oh my gosh.
And I don't remember what their names were, but you can look it up and you'll find the timeline it fits in. And later on in our investigations, when we brought the kids to testify in New York, a lot of this came out. It was well known what was going on. And years later, when I came back here, the sheriff of Stearns County at that time was Charlie Graff. He verified much of the information that I had gathered at that time. And then just a couple of years ago, I was up here, and there's a former sheriff here by the name of Jerry Szalski. I don't know if any of you remember him. And Charlie had told me to go talk to him. And I think that was the saddest interview I ever did, when Jerry told me how he had become sheriff for one term and then was replaced. And he verified all the different information that we had because the kids were coming from here. You don't get 400 kids out of Minnesota without affecting every area. And like I said, these kids testified in public. It was on television. And for the people who don't want to believe that, you look in the New York Times, Selwyn Rapp wrote the article about when McGahee and them guys came to New York to bring the girls back to Minnesota, and they couldn't find any. Because once we went after them, the pimps took their girls out. Now, the other one was in the Minneapolis Star, or at that time I think it was called the Tribune. They wrote about how McGahee and them when they got back, their careers were over. But the information that we had gathered with McGahee was just tremendous on the human trafficking in this state and how they were harassed, and eventually him and Tidwell were both crucified. In fact, here just a couple of months ago, I was up here and gave a speech, and there was a guy in the audience who told me, well, he says, Kenny just died, and he says, the rest of his life he lived in fear. Why does a cop have to live in fear for doing his job? So, you know, and this was right here in Little Falls at the VFW where I was told that. So, and this goes on, and that's why there's so much more. But this is what happened, and like I say, we were out here, the cops, we found two guys, which, the two guys in Columbus, Ohio was the same thing, they got crucified. The only guy that didn't get hurt too bad was the guy out of Chicago because his uncle was the governor. So he didn't have any trouble, but yes, we had a good connection going. We were really putting the hurting in the trafficking business. But right now it's worse than it's ever been.
I wonder if it's any consolation to victims of trafficking to know that the people who are trying to help them are doing it at such risk of their reputations, their careers, and sometimes their lives. I wanted to talk more about Mothers Against Human Trafficking. This is a task force that you were on in St. Cloud.
Yes, and that got started the last time. There were 4 separate investigations I was involved in. I was the only New York cop detective that was there from the day I told you how I got started till when we got stopped. The governor himself with the State Select Committee on Crime got stopped. So by this time, though, we had hired the Policy Science Corporation, which was under Harold Laswell, who was a Freudian scientist. And we brought all the people in to find out what was the psychology behind all of this and that. And when we got stopped the last time, at the last meeting I had with Harold, I says, Harold, how will I ever get this accomplished? And he said a very interesting thing. He said, Jim, the only way you will ever get to do this is if you get the mothers to stand up and protect their children and make the husbands and men do what they're supposed to do to protect their children. And when I say husbands, it refers to not only husbands, society. And that's why when we started the Human Trafficking Task Force in St. Cloud, one of the first things I did was start the Mothers Against Trafficking. And we used it a couple of times and it was very effective, but we never got to go further before I was asked not to attend anymore. The whole thing stopped. But here's one of the things. If you can see this, this is a poster that's made up. And what it does, it very clearly shows you, and it has exclamations on it about what this is all about. How these kids are trolled, what they are, and why these things happen. And the best one on there is a candy store. The candy store, part of it is reference to any location where these pimps and pedophiles can go to find kids is called a candy store. That's part of the terminology. But you'll see this is a chicken hawk. A chicken hawk is a person who preys on like the kids you see walking here. And these kids are referred to as chickens. And there's a reason why, which I won't go on air, but you can read it on the poster. And the other one is you'll see a cop has a blindfold on. Don't blame the cop. Because if he does, it says right here, his career is over. So how many guys are there that are willing to sacrifice their life for something like this? You'll find them. Every once in a while you'll see a cop stand up. You have a guy here in Minnesota right now, Grant Schneider, out of the Minneapolis Police Department. I've talked to him a number of times, and he just hopes that he can finish his career in what he's doing. And he's basically doing what Lieutenant Gary McGaughy started. And the funny thing is, when I asked for Lieutenant McGaughy's files, I was told there are none. So what does that tell you? I don't feel bad, my files are all gone too.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. And there are layers and layers and people manipulating things behind the scenes to make sure that the worst offenders are the ones best protected. So we would like to, this is all leading up to, we would like to start St. Paul's chapter of the Mothers Against Human Trafficking Task Force. And again, I think you can probably get the best information about that in Robin's blog. We'll make sure that that information is available, or you can call the station here, and Chris will get a message to us letting us know who you are, which number, so we can call you back and give you what information we have. Oh yes, another question.
People can call my phone number if they like for information. We would love for any mothers, fathers, anybody interested in this cause to be involved, and we are personally inviting the Franciscan Sisters to join us in this effort. My phone number is 320-360-3931. I would just request that people call before 7 p.m. in the evening or after about 9 a.m. in the morning. Again, that's 320-360-3931. And Chris is going to have a community announcement about our newly forming group for Mothers Against Trafficking up soon on the public access station here.
Right.
Okay, one other thing, while I was on the task force, to show you that this information isn't old, I have a list here of 32 pimps identified in the St. Cloud, again, in this strip that goes and operates. And it was interesting, at the very first meeting we had of the task force, I was seated across the table from what I call Jane Doe 1. And just so that people don't think my information is old. And Jane Doe 1 tells me about the 15-year-old I was describing. 14 feet away sat the acting police chief of St. Cloud, Wilson. A good man, he's since died. He was very interested. But when I asked her, why didn't we tell the police chief? He says, oh no, I can't. I said, oh, okay, so we got the girl. That's how we found out about Jane Doe 2 and got her out of the business. But in the meantime, working with that person, we were able to come up and we have identified these pimps. I took this to numerous police chiefs, sheriffs, county attorneys, even to the FBI. And guess what the FBI told me? We got to check you out. Now they know full well who I am.
Yeah.
Don't kid yourself.
Yeah.
But this is what's happened. I have never from anybody gotten a call on this list or asking for information on it. And this is where our problem comes in. Again, do I blame them? No. It's just the way it is. And I have the times and dates and everything when it was offered and this and that. So this is the thing that the people, and this Mothers Against Trafficking, you get a bunch of mothers that are not in a happy mood, and include a couple of nuns that are mothers of the church. And I will tell you, you'd be amazed how quick people listen. We did it, we made 3 visits, and it worked, but then it was stopped. And this is not easily done, because remember, the biggest reason is that the people are doing nothing about it. And one of the reasons they're doing nothing about it, we don't want to get a bad name. I have right now a dozen victims that are floating out there, and there's nothing to do, nobody to go to. Yeah, sure. Question?
I was just going to suggest, Jim, that you talk about how many people over the years, and even recently, have called you that have or are victims, that their lives have been disrupted, messed up in some way. And if you're willing, maybe you'd like to give out your email or contact information, your phone number or something. So if there's someone out there that has information or is in need of someone to talk to, that they might be able to get a hold of you.
Oh, sure, but I suggest they do that through you. You're the one that started this organization, and I can't do it by myself. I need people like you to support me. I will gladly help how to do it and everything else, and then funnel it to me so you're aware of it. Not that somebody says, which they have done, and I have the actual thing in my reports here, where a deputy sheriff in Stearns County says that I make all this up. That was in reference to the young boy, Josh Gimone, that disappeared from St. John's. He said that my information, I make it all up, it isn't reliable. So you can see how this works.
Yeah, we need plenty of voices.
I just also want to suggest that I think some of the bravest people in the world are those who have been victimized in any way and have the courage to speak up, to speak out, be part of a group, try to make a difference in someone else's life who might be messed up because of the same thing that they might have to go through because no one dared to speak up. And I'm going to suggest that some of the victims probably have a lot more courage than at least some of the law enforcement, even the higher echelon law enforcement people have at any level.
Well, I have numerous 10, 15 victims right now. And in fact, I just heard another one. And they call me, and I've asked them, why do you call me? Oh, we can trust you and you know what you're talking about. I have a young lady that just as of Monday finally got her benefits from the Veterans Administration. She was a victim in the military, and she was used as a deposit, as you might call it, And when she finally got out, she spent 10 years hiding in her bedroom, till one day somehow she got my name and called me, and she went after her benefits, and she got them Monday. So finally the lady can see, and she's gotten rather feisty. Let me tell you, they tried to accuse her of everything and anything, and she is just unbelievable. I have another one, codenamed Jane Doe 4. She is a victim of the Smiley Face Killers, which is an offshoot of the Son of Sam case, which follows Interstate 9094 across where all these college kids end up drowning in streams. And she's another one. She's been on the run. I finally found a place where she has relative safety, but it just goes on and on. There's many of them right here in this 4 or 5 state area. A resort calls me up from up in Cass County. A young girl comes running to them for help because they were using her as a sex slave, and she had no place to go, so they called me. Right down southwest of St. Martin, a ways down, there's a young lady that's being used. She got started at 14, and the parents don't want to say nothing because it'll embarrass them, and she's just back again. We don't know how long till they come and get her again. I just had a girl that got out of the business 2 years ago, south towards Painesville. I also have a file of 22 names of perverts or perpetrators in the southern area there. So, yes, there's not a week that somebody doesn't call. Some people say, well, how do you know they're telling the truth? Well, there are certain things when you know what this is about, when you hear it, you know it's true. Only a victim will know. And I don't even call them victims, they're survivors. And I'm going to tell you something. You got to sit there someday. Let's give me some, again, I'll give you some examples. These names I can use. Tina Diamond, a black female out of the southern part of our country, kidnapped at the age of 13 and forced into prostitution. And when I got her, I had arrested her many times in our posse and different things, and she'd become an informant. But at one point, her pimp beat her to an inch of her death. And she was laying in the hospital, and the detective thought she was going to die, and so did she. And her last wish was, get a hold of Jimmy Boots. My name on the street was Detective Jimmy Boots, because I wore cowboy boots. Not many detectives did, there were only 2 of us. But anyhow, when I went up there and talked to her, and we got her out of the business, and she went to work at Montefiore Hospital. She ended up raising a family, and I never forget, Mother Superior would call me occasionally. He says, do you have any more girls like this to work here? She needed that help. Now there's another one, another girl, excuse me, her name was Tina Diamond.
That's the name you just gave us.
No, the first one was Little Mama, I'm sorry.
okay, that's
This
okay.
is Tina Diamond.
Okay.
When I went looking for her, she's same thing, out of the South, kidnapped, forced into prostitution. And when I needed her as a witness against her pimp, Jimmy Diamond. And I found her in the mental ward at Elmhurst General Hospital. And the doctor, when we called him, I says, I gotta talk to her. He says, don't worry, don't bother coming, she's catatonic. She's been that way for 2 months. She's completely out of it, shock treatment, nothing works. I says, don't worry. So I took an IRS agent I was working with, and we went out there. And there she sat in a chair, straight up, looking straight ahead. And just nothing. And all I did was say, Tina, what's going on? She says, is that you, Mr. Boots? Help me, help me. She gets up, walks over and throws her arms around me. And we got her out. She testified to put her pimp in prison. And she had to finish some jail time, which was totally wrong, because the city of New York had become a pimp themselves. What we would do is arrest the hookers, they'd get fined and give them 60 days to pay or 30 days to pay. The only way they could make money to pay that is go turn more tricks.
Right.
But anyhow, we got her out. So yes, there are many cases, and this goes on. It'd take 10 hours to tell all the different stories. And this is up till now. The 15-year-old just had a baby in the last couple of weeks, but that's not going to be the end. As soon as she's ready, that pimp will have her out there again. But we got to get rid of these pimps. And then you talk about these laws we have passed. We're going to take care of the victims. We're going to put them in homes. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. The girl up here in Brainerd, kidnapped, taken by her pimp. What do you think? Some pimp ain't going to come and get her?
Yeah.
And this is what you got to go. How come we don't hear, although Stearns County Janelle Kendall did tell me that they prosecuted one pimp finally. So this is where the problem is. How many have they prosecuted here in Morrison County? Did you know, Theresa?
No, I have no idea.
Or anywhere. You know, I'm glad to see Chelsea came down from the Brainerd paper to interview me. And you notice when Baxter did it, they used her name. But finally, they're doing something. They're going after the Johns. Well, that sounds so good. Doesn't sound wonderful, except it don't work. And there's a lot of problems that come up. You have to do it, but it will not solve anything. They're still not going after the pimps.
Yeah.
And these pimps are going to be out there forcing these girls to turn tricks. And I hate to tell you what they do to these girls if they don't make enough money. So that's what goes with that.
So there's the human trafficking, mothers against human trafficking needs to address this problem on many levels. The legal level, the emotional level,
Yes.
the community level. There should be a way that survivors, as you put it, of trafficking can meet with one another and exchange stories and survival techniques and find out ways to cope.
Well, yes, and they're doing that. And again, what amazes me, in New York, we had done all of that. But the one thing we did have, we had a pimp squad. And I will tell you something. There was not a pimp that would violate the rules of the pimp squad. If we had a girl, they knew she was protected. And this is the big thing. If you don't protect these girls, the pimps will come and get them.
Of course, because what an easy
Yeah.
way to make a living. You just sit
Yeah.
back and send your prostitutes out to make the money.
Why, certainly, and this is the part when you're going to do these good things for these girls. And then what are you going to do with them when you get them? These are street kids now.
Mm-hmm.
They've been ruined. And if you don't know how to deal with them, you're only going to make it worse.
Yeah.
And that's why we had all these different people, high-ranking, supposedly people that knew what they were doing, and to work with. In New York, it still took 30 years after I retired before they finally figured out that these girls guilty of prostitution should not be held against them because they were forced to commit these crimes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one thing is, prostitution, they say, is a victimless crime. See, that's feel-good, do-good, politically correct. The only victim in prostitution is the prostitute herself.
Yeah.
And don't ever think that all prostitutes are victims, because there's some of them that do that work both ends. So you've got to know what you're doing when you get into it. But you can't hold the girl that's been forced to commit a crime liable. I've got the girl, Jane Doe 1, right now called me about 2 weeks ago. She's been arrested for prostitution in Waite Park. I walked up to the police chief of Waite Park and showed him this list of pimps. He wouldn't even look at it. And I gave him my card, he never called me. Now they arrest her.
Sure.
Now, is there something I'm missing here? I'm sure that there's nobody in your audience that doesn't understand what this is about. How come they don't?
Right. Well, we need to get the public involved. We need you folks to give us a call and let us know what you think should be done, how you would like to participate in this, so that we can get something going and make a difference. These are the most vulnerable members of our society: kids, children, and young women, especially teenage women who don't know enough about what's going on in the world to make these kinds of choices for themselves. Yes. Question?
Jim, would you recommend that a good place to start, would you recommend that every mayor that's within ear reach of this program pass that same resolution or something very similar in their city to help begin the ending of human trafficking?
Why, certainly, you have to do that. It has to start, again, as I said, with the mothers. Who are the mothers? They're the general public out here. And I'm going to tell you that if I was a mother and my city council didn't pass that, I would want to know why. And I mean, I would make no bones. Now, as you will see if you read the write-up here, this is written in a grassroots form right now so that the people understand it. It will be converted to legalese if it's passed as a law. And you watch. I took that to the Stearns County Board. The version of what the Stearns County Board came back is nothing. It is the Minnesota general thing of human trafficking, feel good, do good thing as they came back. They did not adopt that. So.
Well, maybe we need a signature campaign.
Yes.
And circulate a petition so that we can bring it in with a whole lot of signatures showing support for it when we bring it to our own city council and our own mayor. But it's a very, very important thing that needs to be pursued.
Well, and one other thing, what we've done over the years on this, in 1993, Congressman Charlie Rose, I believe he was from North Carolina at the time, and I have a copy of his request in my reports here, where he asked me to come to Washington to prepare a confidential report on human trafficking. Well, I did, and I went to Washington. And what was interesting is the committee, Pat Schroeder from Colorado was on, and a number of others, not one of the politicians that were for this ever ran for office again. The only one that did was Barbara Mikulski out of Maryland. I find that quite interesting.
Just quickly touch on, Jim, what you were talking about earlier about the local murders here in Morrison County or Little Falls. If you could relate some of that to the viewers.
Well, yes, there are, in our investigations, other things. As you know, prostitution and narcotics run hand in hand. And that was another reason they got rid of Lieutenant Gary McGahee, because at the time, one of the big traffickers, which was part of another investigation, he found them in Minneapolis. McGahee's informant, I met her once, and we had that big trafficker in Minneapolis. And I know it's good information because of what happened. But this information led to the drugs that were coming in from the St. Lawrence Seaway to Duluth. This same drug operation is the same one when I talk about Bemidji and the other parts where the kids are funneled up to Duluth. Many of them end up in the shipping stuff. Again, this information is 50 years old. It's been verified almost every 10 years by somebody more telling me about it. But the big drug trafficking that was taking place, There's a number of cases, and one of them is the case of blue gas right up northwest of here. A guy that turned out, he ended up supposedly committing suicide. It was a murder. And why I know he was a federal drug informant, because when I got the case, it said BNDD and a number. The old DEA was known as the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, so I knew he was an informant. And there was other information that came in. But to get to that, there were 2 little girls and a young man that died here in this area because of the drug knowledge they had. These girls, one of them went to St. Francis here, and what we did is we're able to find out that this little girl would meet her boyfriend. What do little girls and little boys do? They get together. And she would sneak out with him, and across from the St. Francis, in fact, at one time I was down there, they showed me, was an ice cream parlor. So they qualified this by saying, but he didn't meet her here, he met her at the ice cream shop, I think it's a funeral home now or whatever. And they would go do their thing. Well, these people, the girl and her sister died, and the boyfriend died within 3 to 5 days of the girls dying. Now, again, the former Sheriff Zazalski, the former Sheriff Charlie Graff, all had told me about this. And there was a guy that I was sent up to see here who was an honest cop. And I interviewed him, just a matter of months ago, verified what I had, you know. Now, how could this happen? Well, one thing was, the mother and father were in my house. And when I had to go find out, I says, young girls, she was telling me how her daughter played the violin and stuff, and I says, and that she left the last will and testament. I says, young violin players don't leave a last will and testament. There's something else. Well, these people were killed, and this is not verified information for their knowledge of the drug trafficking. The names are all there, but why hasn't anything been done?
Yeah.
You look at, again, I'll use the name, go to Brainerd, look up the Billy West. Like I say, the guy that got killed was Blue Gas, then look up at Billy West up in Brainerd. Follow that up to Bemidji. It's all there. It's still, like I said, I just got the call on Monday. So what are we doing?
Still very
And I'll guarantee you there are more parents in this area, because where did the kids come from that I brought in to testify and that we interviewed? They had a mother and father from somewhere.
Yeah.
And you know what? Many of the parents are scared to talk about it. Oh, look what they're going to do to me. Look at the bad name we're going to get. Forget the bad name. You know, stand up and do what you should for your children.
Yes. And
This is the thing that just, you know, gets me. The mother said to us, well, I don't want anybody to know that my daughter was a bad girl. What's wrong with a girl going with a guy? You know, isn't that what keeps this world moving?
Yeah.
But we're going to let them die and do nothing about it? There's more. There's more up here. And they all know about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I bet you there's half the population in this county knows about it.
Well, you know, there's courage in numbers, so maybe as the organization grows, people who have a personal stake in this, whose own children have been.
And then protect the cops that are going to do something.
Yeah.
If you can't protect them, like myself, you know, I don't complain about what happened. I knew what I was doing, I knew what would happen. But, like Harold Laswell said, if you'd have had the mothers behind you, they could have never touched you. And I find that to be true. I found an honest cop up here. He's retired now, but there's more. Don't kid yourself. I've talked to some. But how can you expect them to do your dirty work if you're not going to back them?
Right. Oh, there's so much more that we could go into here, but we're down to the last minute or so. Is there any final statement you'd like to make that leave the audience with to think about?
Yes, again, get this Mothers Against Trafficking going, and I can show you how to set it up. I've used it. I was given an example of that when I did an investigation down in Kentucky. They had 26,000 mothers on a phone bank, and that was in the old days when you had to actually call. Can you imagine what we could do with modern communication? And what they would do is go into a place, the 5 mothers would go in, and if they didn't get what they wanted, they'd hit the button, and put the calls out. In this particular time, 26,000 people were calling in 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, and this was a government official in Washington, met with us. You get 26,000 people to start calling, you're going to get results. And there's not a politician or cop or judge in this country that can withstand the mothers. That's my word of advice.
Well, that's a lot to chew on. And I want to thank you so much, Jim, for coming and joining us here today with your wonderful stories. But we wouldn't hear from any other source. Again, this is Jim Rothstein, New York City retired New York City detective. I'm Theresa Skorseth. This is County Talk, and we'll see you soon.